everybody, Jim Messina here at the Rebeats Cafe for Vintage Drums Talk at the 2014 Chicago Vintage and Custom Drum Show. I am so pleased to be sitting here with basically a newcomer to the vintage drum community, but he's really making a name for himself, Mr. Bob Campbell.
Hey.
How you doing, my friend?
Good to see you.
Now, we've met before, but
Yes,
it's
we
so
have.
good to be here at the show with you in the flesh. We're so pleased to have you sit down and talk with us today.
Thanks very much for inviting me.
You know, maybe a couple of years ago, nobody might have known the name Bob Campbell, but in the last couple of years, Bob, I've noticed you've been making some strides ever since we did a deal together. And this is how I met Bob Campbell. I had the 13th Slingerland Black Beauty to sell, okay? So someone wanted me to sell that for them. And one of the people that contacted me was a guy named Bob Campbell. And you sought me out, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Ever since then, you've been really rolling as far as visibility in the vintage drum community, and I can't believe how far you've come in that short amount of time. Why don't you tell folks what you've been doing since you bought that 13th Slingerland Black Beauty?
Well, actually, the story behind that is, I'd love to talk about a little bit more. I mean, I had seen your videos on the restoration of, I guess, was it number 14?
Yes.
And I had seen number 13. And I thought, you know, out of the blue, why not contact you and introduce myself and say, you know, is that for sale by any chance? And if it's not for sale now, maybe in the future. And out of the blue, I get this email, you know, and I was flattered to death just to hear. And it worked out so well. I mean, it was just
Beautiful drum.
A dream. It
Beautiful
really was.
drum. Now, at that time, I was in possession of the 13th Slingerland Black Beauty, and along came the parts to the 14th Slingerland Black Beauty. I'm thinking, who do I think I am, having two Slingerland Black Beauties in my possession? And that's when we got together with Bob, and we swung this deal, and ever since then, you've been going strong. So I know you were a collector along the way, but and you had sent me a list about some of the earlier drums. You know, you had some Black Beauties and 20s, but a lot of later stuff that was collectible, like anniversary type things and stuff that I wasn't all that familiar with. But since then, you've been seeking out some really hot collectible drums, I think.
Yeah, well, I sort of changed my philosophy. I think in the beginning, I was more focused on the more modern custom market, and I enjoyed that a lot. But to me, what was missing from that was the history. And the more I talked to people like Mike Curato and Mark Cooper and John Aldridge and just people in the community, yourself, the more I learned about it, the more I found that something that I was very much drawn to. So it wasn't just about the drum, it was about the history of the drum. And at the same time, when I saw some of the wonderful restoration work that was being done to save drums, like Mark did and Mike did, and AK, who I discovered recently, I just said, you know, I want to be part of this community. And those people were wonderful resources. And as they've said to you, they learned from their predecessors. Well, you know, I learn from them all the time. I send them emails, and I'm flattered that they send emails back. They answer my questions. When they can't, they send me to somebody else. You know, John Aldridge, too. He's been fantastic.
That's what it's all about.
So,
It's you're experiencing, you know, the pleasure that you get out of being part of the community, and you've elevated yourself to that point. Yeah. And this is not to say that all you members on the forum and all you collectors out there that may not be have your name all over the place, but you're collectors and you can appreciate it. That doesn't mean you're not discounted at all, but you can also experience this same kind of vibe that we get. It's the same thing. Collecting is collecting as long as you're coming from the right place, as Bob has. He had been doing what he wanted for years at one point with the collectible drums, but then to get into the more historical aspect of it.
20s, 30s, yes.
Yes, and we're talking basically 20s, 30s, 40s. These drums can provide really a lot of satisfaction. Absolutely. And you have sought that out. And I'm just incredible at the rate that you're moving. Your name is everywhere now, and that's...
I don't know about that.
Well, it is. He's on all the forums. You're asking the right questions. You're very timely with your responses. And I see that you're doing some writing. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in writing, and one of my largest failures was an attempt some years ago to write a book on snare drums, and I realized that number one, that my business knowledge is quite lacking, but my writing skills, I think, are not too bad. And I did a few articles back in, I think, 2005, 6, 7 for Not So Modern Drummer and even Modern Drummer. I did one article. And then I moved away to Asia due to business. And then when I came back, that's when I really said, this is where I really want to be. I want to be writing about it, but I want to write knowledgeably. But knowledgeably means looking at the catalogs. It means contacting the experts in the field and making sure you cross-corroborate all of the information. Harry Kangany lives, very close to me. I talk to him all the time, and what's great about him is he has the same passion. I mean, we view ourselves as historians. I mean, I would love to have, like, Mike Curado's collection, and if I could kill him and feel that I could do that in some form of ethical sense, I might even consider that, to have his collection, but I like the guy too much, so I can't do that. So all I can do is hope that someday that he will want to hand down some of his collection. And actually, all kidding aside, Mike has been a wonderful resource, as well as Bunny and Mark, for helping me decide whether I'm buying authentic drums, because there are many fakes out there, or there are many where the parts are missing, and these guys have connections to find them or to repair them. And they've done fabulous work along with AK out in Italy.
AK is the magician. Actually, if you don't know that name, we're going to put that up right now. You got to check out AK's site. Adrian Kirschler, to me, and even the big name, Mike sends his stuff to him all the time. Dave Brown, we've all had something to do with AK. This man can literally fabricate the strainers of the past. Now, I haven't seen anybody else doing that.
He does it unbelievably
It's just
well.
incredible how, I don't know how he's doing it, but he does it. And his ability to age drums, and he can restore them. He asks you, would you like that aged, or would you like it to look brand new? The choice is yours. He's a magician. Adrian Kirschler, check him out. Yeah. But that's the thing. You're seeking the knowledge, and you're at that level now where you're buying some significant pieces where you got to know your stuff, or talk to someone who does. Exactly. And that's what you're doing.
Exactly.
And I've done that myself with pieces that, gosh, I have an opportunity to get something that's rare, and some bucks are involved. And if I don't know about it, I got to check it out beforehand. And that's why it's so important for you guys to go back and read those Rob Cook books and all the other resources that are out there. Mark Cooper supplies a lot of great information on Cooper's vintage drums.
He's got a great website.
Yeah, and good pictures and everything. And if you can't, call some of the guys we've been talking about here. There's plenty of stuff on the internet. As Bob Campbell has shown you, if he doesn't know it, he can find out about it, and then you make your purchase.
Yeah, so a good example of that is I was fortunate to purchase both a 14-inch and a 15-inch by 6.5-inch silver anniversary standard model snares. And it took a while to figure out, what was going on with the 15-inch, because if you look at the actual 36 and 37 catalogs, it's very hard to find, but in the very small print, you'll see there's a custom 6.5 by 15 that you can order. And it turns out, when I did a little bit more research, it turns out the drum was owned by Ken Coomer, the Wilco drummer and Nashville producer. So for me, my column is every drum tells a story. What better story than to hunt down, figure this out, go through the original catalogs, and then know that this was played on some very significant tracks. To me, that drum is wonderful, and it sounds great too.
And then there's just a vibe that comes off of that.
Oh, absolutely.
Now. We've been doing some interviews here about some pretty interesting drums, and it's cool when you get the backstory to it.
Oh yeah.
The very first interview of the show yesterday, we had the Kahn drum that's kind of surfaced here.
Jason's, yes.
Yes, and. It's there's with all that history to it. That's what really makes it interesting, because there are other gold engraved, heavily engraved Kahn drums,
which mostly Mike Curado owns.
Of course, any drum like that, he's going to have his hands on. But I'm just saying that we've had interesting pieces like that come along.
Yes.
And you got to know what it is. It's the
Absolutely.
history attached to that, which makes it intriguing to me.
Sure.
And the vintage drum community likes stuff like that. And now you're experiencing that with these purchases you just made.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as far as your articles go, how many have you written now?
Well, I think 4 now, not including the ones from previous, but recently in the Every Drum Tells a Story, I think Wild Road, my Triumphal.
We'll get to that in a minute.
That's a great story because that didn't happen except for you putting me next to Bunny in a lineup, and Bunny's coming over and saying, would you really like a real one? Because I had the 100th anniversary Triumphal. And I'm like, you're serious? And he goes, yeah. And I'm like, you're really serious? Yeah. And here I am. I own this, Wild Rose Triumphal. And of course, though, I did, even though it was Bunny, I checked with Mike, I checked with Harry, I talked to everybody I could, and said, is this a real deal? And what's a reasonable price? I had no idea what to offer. But that drum is just, I'm along with the Slingerland Black Beauty.
Why don't you tell
fabulous.
the folks I mean, we've heard of the Triumphals, and again, Adrian Kirschler did the reproductions of those the Triumphals, but Bob is speaking of a very, very special Triumphal, even more rare than the 6.5s that we've seen. Why don't you tell them about what makes that Wild Rose so special? What makes it so rare?
I would say people like Mark or Mike could probably describe it better, and Bunny, of course. But it's a 4x14, and the engraving is typical of the Triumphal period. It has these rose patterns throughout it, rose petals, and it's engraved on the rims, engraved all throughout, engraved even on the lugs. So so the attention to detail is really amazing, and the shell is built much like your modern Black Beauty, where it has this sort of triangular fold back to the shell, so it has that chamber.
Yes.
And I know there's a lot of difference of opinions about whether it was the two-piece shells that made the Black Beauties great and sound great. I think it's that, but I also think it's that chamber. I think that chamber makes a difference, because they do have a unique sound. You can take any reproduction Black Beauty that's out there, and maybe you can get 80% there, but you will not get exactly there. And a true Black Beauty from 20s, 30s, you can tell the sound. I can tell the sound. I'm sure Mike can tell the sound. It's definitely different.
Now, are you telling me you played the Wild Rose Triumphal just
a little bit?
A little bit. You couldn't help yourself, right?
That one, I have to admit, I didn't play a lot because it was a little expensive. So
I would be afraid.
I do have to be careful. But at the same time, if I weren't to play it at least a few times, I mean, I'm not contributing to history at all by not knowing what it sounds like.
Right.
I mean, it's not just a painting you hang on a wall, but it is something rare enough where I want to make sure that I don't damage it.
Yes.
And I keep it in its best condition. And if I'm thinking about in any way cleaning or whatever, I mean, Mike introduced me to like Cape Cod cloths and lemon oil,
right.
But he also
Those
told me don't do
staples.
this and don't do that because you'll lose the finish. Mm-hmm. And it's very important to listen to that knowledge. It's really important, because so many drums have been destroyed by people who take furniture polish, or they take something else and think they're cleaning the drum, and what they're doing is they're destroying it permanently.
Yep. So now, as far as the articles, we that was one.
All right, so there was the Wild Rose Triumphal, and then I have an 8x14, more of a modern drum, made for George Lawrence for the band Poco, which is recently disbanded, where he put the Poco legend, the stallion logo on it, and then it's got magnolias all over it. And it was the first 8x14 drum that John Aldrich had ever engraved. So John and I had fun sort of reminiscing about this drum because it took him forever to do. And it's gorgeous. And George, fortunately, through a relationship with the magazine, after a while said, I'll sell it to you for the right price. And,
terrific.
And so now I have that as part of my collection. But it's personal to me because, I grew up, I was a teenager in the 70s, and Poco Eagles were really big. One of my very first bands played these 12-string ovations, and they played songs from the big Poco, Legend album, which later came out and had those big hits. And for me, I'm thinking, wow, this is like putting my childhood together, and then meeting with George and having that drum. My sister even called me up and goes, "You have the Poco drum?" And I was like, "Yeah, I have the Poco drum." And even though it's not a 1920s drum, it's the Poco drum. It's engraved by John, and it's a beautiful
See,
drum.
now there you have the vibe coming up, and there's your appreciation.
Yeah.
Let's look at a couple other things that we've got
Oh,
here.
okay.
All right, now why don't you tell us what we've got going on here?
Okay, so this was a Black Beauty that I found, I believe it was on eBay. It was coated in what we thought was paint, and Mike Curato and I had a lot of discussions about this, as well as Adrian. And we really weren't sure whether that was paint or maybe a poor, paint job over the black nickel.
Okay.
And what we found out, well, actually what Mike found out, was that indeed, unfortunately, there was only paint. But under there, the engraving was quite intact.
I see.
And what you see in the bottom is actually after Mike had taken off the hardware, and now AK had redone all of the engraving, and he's blocked it out, so all the engraving is intact. This is not him touching up anything
Okay.
other than putting the black nickel on.
Yes.
And you'll see a close-up of the Ludwig engraving. You can see
There
how
it is.
good his work is.
Look at
it's
that.
just phenomenal.
This is what we're talking about with Adrian.
And then Mike had done a nice job cleaning up the hardware. I unfortunately don't have that picture with me. I'll send it
Okay,
to you.
sure, we'll put that
and
up.
put it together. That drum just speaks to me. It's a wonderful, wonderful
Again,
drum.
a
and it's a
fantastic
combination of AK's work and Mike's work.
Okay.
And the two together just brought back this piece of history that would have been lost. And I don't normally restore drums, but when it's gone, when they've taken off the black nickel, I mean, this is the way it should have looked in the day. And the best thing I thought I could do was bring it back.
All right, now next we want to look at another. Speaking of the con drums, that we're just going to take a second here to touch on this.
Okay.
Look, we have engraving. This is very familiar. Looks
Yes.
like yesterday's drum we had with Jason Batchko and the con drum. Tell me about this drum right here.
So I found this on Craigslist of all things, and I'm not a big Craigslist fan, but it was going for a very reasonable price, and I could barely see in the picture the engraving, and it was pretty clear at one point that the hoops had gold plating, the clips had gold plating, and I contacted Mike about this, and I think words like perhaps is this worth saving, or is this or whatever.
Yes.
But I think the point is there's a lot of work that will be needed to bring this back to a good preserved state. It's got about 15 holes in it, which is the big problem.
Oh, boy.
Which is like the worst case, but I got the drum for next to nothing, and I said, how many of these drums are there? It's got a very low number. I'm rather partial to drums. I'm from Indianapolis now, the Indianapolis area, so this is an Elkhart drum with a number. I said, go for it. Let's do it. Let's see how it goes. And I think Mike is having a blast with it. That's right. I can
Oh,
tell.
yeah.
So stay tuned, because I'm sure Mike will give you more information when it's finally done. But I can't wait to see it.
Before you know it, we're going to see the end of that drum. We want to keep up with that. I want to say, Bob, you are up and coming. Folks, you're looking at a new collector that has hit the scene in the last couple of years. He's making strides, and he's buying some really great stuff, and you're going to be a great caretaker, I'm sure.
Hope so.
Welcome to the vintage drum community.
Thank you.
are on top now, buddy.
Well, thanks.
Bob
Thanks.
Campbell, let's hear it for Bob, I'll tell you.
Thanks very much.
Jim MESSINA, Vintage Drums Talk, right here at the Rebeats Cafe at the 2014 Chicago Vintage and Custom Drum Show. Stay tuned, we got more for you. We'll see you later, folks.